There we go. Hi, I'm resident of Collinwood, Joel Sains, joined by Patrick McCray, author of the Dark Shadows Day book. How are you, man?
I'm great. I'm great. If life is Jiffy Lube, then I am lubed.
Nice. So we're here to discuss what would have happened if Carl Kolchak, the Night Stalker, the man who investigated more supernatural happenings than Fox Mulder ever dreamed about, would have came to Collinsport. So I got to ask you, what would it have took to get Carl to come to Collinsport?
It depends. If it's, just like a supernatural thing, like anything in any one of the episodes.
Right.
Some piece in the Collinsport Star that was a little too vague would have brought him there. If he was busy investigating something serious in Chicago, then Vincenzo would see there's a cat show or something going on in Collinsport and force him to go to get him off the story, and then Carl would stumble onto the real story.
Do you think, I know we don't hear too much media out of Collinsport during Dark Shadows. We hear some things, not much. Yeah. So do you think it's possible Carl could have just phoned up the Collinsport Star one day and we just never knew about it?
Sure. Yeah. I figured the Collinsport Star is like the penny saver. Unless Maggie goes missing or something, there's nothing that happens that would get reported to them.
Right.
Mrs. Johnson's out of floor wax or something's the biggest story to hit, or there's a bad shrimp was found, but that's about it.
There's an episode that I wanted you to watch where there's this shape-shifting creature that takes
the Rakshasa.
So that made me think of a couple things. Number one, I always felt the Leviathan could take the shape of a human. So what if by chance Carl's investigating this case and he hears about these people who can turn into humans, but they're actually serpent creatures?
Well, sure. Paul Stoddard sends him a crazy letter. He sends letters to any of these people that he can find, and that that's what he does, and Kolchak follows it up.
Yeah. Do you think how much of a missed opportunity was it that we didn't get Carl Kolchak and Barnabas together?
As fun as it is with the Dan Curtis connection and all of that, to geek out over this stuff. This is what we're doing.
Yep.
Is that you have a problem, and the problem is that Carl Kolchak exists in a world where the problems are all ones that he needs to destroy.
Yeah.
And that he's going to do it within 45 minutes.
Yep.
The vampire is the only episode that picks up from something else.
Yep.
And that's it. And so Carl is there to deal with very short-term issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that, usually it's someone who's trying to keep something hidden. So Carl Kolchak would work brilliantly in Collinwood if the villains were showing up, but not the heroes. I guess in terms of interacting with Barnabas, if we did have Carl there for a longer term stay, and you got to ask yourself, well, what keeps Carl Kolchak in Collinsport for that long? These are the two stories that I think he would have fit best into. Sure, figuring out something about the Leviathans, probably having to do with Sky Rumson.
Yeah.
Because publishing kind of thing going on there. But, I don't think Kolchak ever dealt with an entire conspiratorial organization. I think Carl just dealt with here's a werewolf on a ship. And that's it. So, it would not have taken long for the Leviathans to have had him whacked.
Right.
I mean, that's just what would have happened. That, you know, United News Service, internet or whatever, International News Service, or whatever he wrote, Newsmax or whatever it was that he wrote for. You know, their offices would have been torched, and Vincenzo would have been tortured until he'd given up, you know, Carl's position and then killed, and then Carl would have been killed. So, you know, he could throw his tape recorder at Jeb, but, you know, what's that going to do? Bruno would just absorb it with his hair. At least he has some. And God, I'm handsome. But that would be it, you know. So the other storyline that I think would have been interesting is him figuring out that Nicholas Blair was doing something around the time that they were going to try and bring Eve back. Yeah. Like at the end of the Nicholas Blair storyline, that Kolchak would have been reporting something on the disappearance of Dr. Lang, the weird circumstances, something weird Jeff Clark said, or something like that.
I'll tell you another one. When Laura first appears in Collinwood.
Oh, sure. Laura the Phoenix. Yeah, because he's following the Phoenix story.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think Kolchak could have easily picked up a newspaper somewhere and saw woman burns to death in apartment. And that would have led him to her. You know, I once thought about how many different ways could Carl Kolchak go to different places, like Haddonfield or, you know, Crystal Lake. It would not take much to get this man to these places. And to me, what would lure Kolchak to like a Haddonfield would be one thing: Michael killing his sister in 63, really, because wait, this kid killed his sister, really? And then he would go talk to Loomis. I mean, it would not take. I told this to a friend of mine. I told this to Darnell Weeks. I said, it does with a guy like Kolchak. It doesn't take much to get him to where he wants to go to investigate something. The slightest thing piques his interest.
Yeah. I think that makes all the sense in the world. And keep in mind, those are not big conspiratorial stories. You know, now I think you know him checking up on these weird deaths from Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah,
was one of the reporters to cover, you know, because did it go public that Freddy Krueger was molesting the kids, or was that kept a secret of the parents?
Now here's the thing with this, and you don't officially, because I got to go by the movies too with this, and this is sort of what's a pain in the ass about A Nightmare on Elm Street. With the original Nightmare on Elm Street series, you don't officially find out Freddy molested the children until part 5, where there's a newspaper article about it.
But that was in the first one that they talked about.
Well, they say child killer. They in the first one, in the 1984 original, child killer. But you can take child killer and interpret child molestation. You can what I'll say is Wes Craven in his original does a fine job of not necessarily saying child molester, but implying child molester.
Sure.
You know, so you can sort of take, because the reason the parents are getting upset is because kids are getting hurt. Well, how are they getting hurt other than murdered, molested? So I even picked it up when I first watched it when I was a kid. I'm like, wait, these kids were more than just killed now. And so the other thing is too, they said if you pay attention to Nancy's mother, I know she's drunk some of the time, but she says, we were so shocked to find out who it was. Well, why were they shocked? Because Freddy was a dad.
Oh, he was?
Yeah, he was a
movies. I stopped with the one with Dick Cavett.
Okay. Well, Freddy was a husband and a father. Now, yes, they knew he was, later on you find out he was the son of 100 maniacs and a nun was raped.
I remember that.
Okay, well, in Freddy's Dead, and you have to go watch delicious.
This is the episode called Drop Dead Fred. Right? Is that it? Is that the one where Paul Giamatti's blue? I've lost track at this point.
Okay, Freddy's Dead is the one where, okay, Roseanne makes a cameo, Johnny Depp makes a cameo. There's this. It's in 3D partially, so it's the so you go there, but in it they're starting off with this boy, this young kid, this teenager, or whatever, they're trying to say, they're hinting he may be Freddy's son.
Okay.
Well, Freddy tells him before he kills him, "You're not my kid," but you helped me find my kid, and kills the boy. And you find out that this girl is actually Freddy's daughter.
Okay.
And that's where you sort of discover the backstory.
Psychic?
What's that?
Is she psychic?
No,
Okay.
No, she's not psychic. But one of the best lines is in this movie, and Freddy says it: every town has an Elm Street.
That's a good line.
You know.
That's a good line. Wow. Okay. Well,
it's not
there we go.
It's
there's
not
a joke I was working towards at one point, but it's not going to fly. There was also a joke about the boiler room being the non-existent place under the pizza restaurant where Pizzagate took place, which of course there was no basement. There was none of that, not a ring of satanic pedophiles in Washington or whatever. But Freddy would work well into that. And I'm sure that 8chan is spinning right now, if it even still exists, now making connections.
So now Kolchak, I do think, to your point, would find out about the Springwood slasher, as they named Fred the killer, was the original murders
in Nightmare on Elm Street, or
yeah.
Okay,
in Nightmare on Elm Street. In Nightmare on Elm Street, the killer who was killing the kids before they found out it was Freddy, was called the Springwood slasher because it took place in Springwood, Ohio, fictionally. So, and then when they found out it was Freddy, they say about how they were. This part's in the first one where Nancy's mother says, "We were shocked to find out who it was."
Yeah.
And you find out way, way later, well, Freddy was a husband and a father. That's why they were shocked.
Okay.
So it all sort of in a weird, messed up way. God, Freddy's Dead makes sense, even though it's not a serious movie.
It's the only movie.
Oh my God. No, but I agree with you. Kolchak would find a way there to me to Springwood.
Sure. That's an obvious one. Right. There's some weird sleep center that's doing a study. There's, yeah.
But for Collinwood, you said Nicholas Blair with Eve. I like that.
That seems like an obvious one.
Right. There's another one too, and I think this could slip out, and it might not necessarily be supernatural, but Wincliffe itself, because a lot of weird shit probably goes on there.
Sure.
And I'm sure somebody, there might not be
somebody who survived something, and he winds up at Wincliffe.
Right. And here's the thing. There might not be this reporter who listens to this mental patient who eventually gets out, or this mental patient, or this reporter, but Carl Kolchak, he'd listen to you.
Sure. Now, it also depends on the era of Carl Kolchak.
Yeah.
Because there's the period before the Night Stalker. And do we have evidence that he was running into this weird stuff prior to the Night Stalker?
No, we don't.
Okay. So at that point, he's just a reporter. Maybe he gets something sensationalistic. Maybe not. He's probably a good reporter. Obviously, there's a Woodward and Bernstein, kind of thing, maybe. I think that it was right as the Watergate stuff was going on. So reporters were becoming, quite the heroes. Even though, when was the Night Stalker movie?
I want to say 1970 something. I'm not sure.
It was 70s.
Yeah.
But all of that was certainly in the consciousness of people, because Matheson originally wanted Kolchak almost as kind of a clown. He imagined, this is true, he imagined Kolchak in Bermuda shorts and Hawaiian shirts, and he's in Vegas and all of that. And it was Darren McGavin who said, "Listen, I know reporters. No, they don't. No, they don't dress like this." So he had a lot of influence on kind of making the character more serious. But so there's that period up through the end of the Night Stalker TV series. Just eventually just running into these things every week, and then there's the period after. We don't know what happened to Carl after that. So I think his attitude and the world of the media would have been different at every stage. So if it's before the Night Stalker, you're going to get one Kolchak. If it's during, you're going to get another.
Right.
And then if it's after, because, I think it's worth talking about, where did Carl Kolchak go? What became of him? Do you have any thoughts on what a reunion movie of the Night Stalker would have shown us? Or just where Carl Kolchak would have gone? I have two theories, but I want to hear yours.
Okay, the reunion for the Night Stalker.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to take this straight to the mid-'80s.
Okay.
And I'm going to take this straight to Louisiana. And I'm going to say Swamp Thing. DC Swamp Thing would have brought Carl Kolchak back.
Okay.
I know that sounds weird.
But would Kolchak have been a different type of person by then? Would he have changed at all?
I think he would have been partially... I think he'd have been, by this time, he's ready. The reunion would have sort of been his retirement. That's what, to me, what a reunion would have been. Him getting ready to retire. But this one last case about an explosion in the bayou of Louisiana takes him there.
Okay.
And he starts looking, and here's these whatever smugglers, evil men, doing some shady shit. And there's where he runs into Swamp Thing, who saves him. And Kolchak tries to interview him. What are you? I know that sounds like a weird crossover. Or the other one, and this would have been harder because Walter B. Gibson, a.k.a. Maxwell Grant, created the character in Mystery. But the Shadow.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
So, I don't...
You know what would have been an interesting Shadow story? He starts getting weird assignments from Vincenzo. And that's when he notices Vincenzo has a ring.
Garrisaurin, yeah.
He's one of the Shadow's agents.
Yeah.
And that one of the reasons why he keeps trying to keep Kolchak from making news about this stuff is that Cranston's telling him, keep this stuff quiet. I want as little attention to this sort of thing as possible. And that's the reason Vincenzo is so weird about this stuff, is that Vincenzo, is one of the Shadow's agents.
Another guy he could have ran into too would have been Clyde Burke, who was a newspaper man.
Who's that?
He was an agent of the Shadow.
Oh, okay.
The Shadow had so many agents, and here's the weird part too. The Shadow could also look like anybody.
Yeah.
Like he himself could be a reporter or a janitor, and you never knew.
Yeah.
But that's the insanity of it. But go ahead. What's your two? I'm sorry.
Well, okay. And maybe they basically deal with the same thing, but they go in two different directions. The media was changing radically in the 70s, from the late 60s into the 70s, and then into the 80s. In that, you had the rise of Weekly World News.
Yeah.
And the rise of, Hans Holzer And who are those two hacks? They made those dumb, the things with Patrick Wilson and his sideburns, and the weird little doll, the bedeviled movies, or what are they called? The Conjuring.
Conjuring, yeah.
Yeah, the Ed and Lorraine Warren stuff, and you know that all these phonies are getting all of this press, and so he goes to work for one thing is that he ends up getting fired from INS because there's a new editor who comes in and says, listen, we're a cheap news service. We're not Reuters. So people believe all this Amityville horror nonsense. So Kolchak, you've been really good at figuring this out. So now Kolchak's problem is that he goes and investigates stuff and there's nothing there. Or what's there is so subtle that he writes his stories and it's not sensationalistic enough. You got to punch it up.
Right.
And so he's now the thing is inverted. Yeah. And so that would be one of the things. He's very frustrated because he's trying to tell the truth, and they keep making him more sensationalistic and crazy. The other thing that I think probably would have happened is that Kolchak's got to eat, and that eventually a publisher comes to him and says, why don't we just collect your stories into a book? America's Weirdest Stuff, Part 1. And Kolchak becomes a Hans Holzer, Ed and Lorraine Warren, Chariots of the Gods type person, just sort of turning these things into more successful stuff. And he himself just starts to exaggerate more and more. And then eventually he runs out of things, just, kind of keeps it going. He's become corrupt. But the wealth is so dizzying. And, he rationalizes it by, well, this will let me travel here and investigate that. And that's how it maybe starts out. And then after a while, it's just, okay, I'll go to Loch Ness and write about something. And so in his profound cynicism, he comes to Collinsport and then realizes, oh my God, this is all still real. And it's much weirder and much bigger than I thought of. And now I'm stuck in parallel time or whatever.
There's one I forgot to mention, and I just thought about it as you were talking, because they incorporated reporters later on. But Carl Kolchak could have been a part of the Watchers for Highlander.
Oh, sure.
He could have been photographing the immortal sword fighting, there's a lot of things.
It would have been a lot different if Carl Kolchak had been stationed on Coruscant. You notice there's no media, no reporters in that at all. And here's Padme, and she's preggers, and she's with this hot Jedi who's not supposed to do anything with Devimin folk. And there's no reporters. There's no one. There's no media. There's nothing. So,
Kolchak.
Federation News.
Yeah.
Federation.
I gotta ask you, what would a Night Stalker reboot look like today?
Well, I hope it would not look like that reboot they did a few years ago. The thing with Stuart Townsend. Stuart Townsend? Yeah, which just had no identity at all. Well, you got to ask yourself, what is essential to Kolchak? It's his fear. Carl Kolchak is afraid. I mean, when he's sewing the zombie's lips shut, his hands are, shaking and all of that. He does what he needs to do anyway, but he is not a traditional barrel-chested alpha hero, and he doesn't have the crazy drive that Fox Mulder has. Right. So that's not going to be there either. Unfortunately, it would be really serialized, which could be okay, but Carl Kolchak, when they did the remake, he was trying to avenge his dead wife or something, that she had died under mystery, and that's what drove. No, sometimes someone just discovers something interesting and decides to study it. Yep. And that's the case of Carl Kolchak. He has to be funny. He has to be ironic. 10 years ago, I would have cast Cheech Marin as Carl Kolchak. Now, if you could get him, I'd cast Paul Giamatti.
Yeah, I could see Paul Giamatti.
Tenacious, but ultimately very human. Very, very, very human. And you've also got to remember that Kolchak was not. Now he looks like a dinosaur, but he was not. Look at him on the Night Stalker. He has a hot girlfriend. He's driving a cool car. He's got that tape recorder. That tape recorder back then sold for, I think, what would now be about $800 or $900 today.
Nice.
Yeah, a friend of mine tracked it down, and it was selling for like $200 back then. So Kolchak was good with media, which means that he would have been good with social media.
Yeah.
It's kind of like what they did with Sherlock.
Yeah.
And that I think the temptation would be to play him as too much of a dinosaur. I mean, I don't think Kolchak's running a TikTok.
No.
But news and information travels very differently now. I think the temptation would be, we've got to make him a crusty old-fashioned guy because we see Darren McGavin through the lens of Gene Shepard.
Yeah.
And the part he played in Christmas Story. But that was 10, 15 years after Night. It was 10 years after Night Stalker. So he is a different guy then. But we have to remember, Kolchak's in his early to mid 40s, and he's still in shape, and he's a guy. A little more rumpled, but he's a guy. So that's what I would do. But I also would keep him a grown-up.
Yeah.
Jack wouldn't be covered in tattoos.
Right.
He's not an anarchist or something like that. Yeah. Here's the thing: is that the temptation now, I think, would be to make him more of an outsider, so that we could say, oh, well, he's asking for it by dabbling in these things and looking into these things. But for me, Carl Kolchak was always a guy. He's just a real everyman who is, his difference is that he's willing to not put aside factual errors that are just inconvenient, but instead take each of those errors and see, no, that's the story.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what I got. I don't know. What do you think?
I like your Paul Giamatti's choice, and I like what you said about he can't be a dinosaur, and I agree, he can't. This can't be. Do not trap this character in the era he came from,
and don't make him a cartoon.
Right. I'm gonna go somebody a little more younger than what you did, and I'm gonna say Ralph Macchio. And I know that might be true.
Right. Although I think Ralph Macchio may be Paul Giamatti's age.
Right. Yeah.
But okay, well, I haven't heard that name since before your father handed me this lightsaber. What? Yeah, let's see. Who's Vincenzo? Danny Bonaducci? No, continue. I
love it. But Ralph Macchio, you'd see the cops showing up, and there would be this body, and they would see this reporter taking pictures. He'd be in the hat and the coat, and Kolchak, how'd you get here? Twitter. Like, how he knew, right? How did he know?
I have a phone. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a phone. Twitter. See? And that's things that they could do is you have to make sure this guy knows, gets there before the police seal it all off. He's there ahead of them. So, hey, I have a phone, Twitter, knowledge is power. And
well, here's the thing, man. After the pilot,
yeah,
when he does put out the story, even if it gets redacted a little bit by the newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
He becomes the darling of a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
And they become his Baker Street irregulars.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's got, whether he likes it or not, a network of people. And his problem, I would think in that, his problem would be parsing through what's bullshit and what's not, because he's being tweeted at constantly. Every time somebody hears like a noise in the attic, Kolchak's there. But yeah, sure. I got online.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. Like, it could be either something simple like, "Oh, I think the boogeyman's in my basement or in my closet," to, I think Bigfoot swimming in my pool.
Sure.
Like, there could be a tons of things he knows that sounds bullshit, and maybe he has to detect through all the tweets he gets daily, like you're saying.
That's great. I would love to see that.
But another thing too is, let's say the first case he solves involves missing kids. Okay. So here's these parents, once he solves the case, are eternally grateful. And the police go, "Okay, hotshot, who do you think's taking these kids?" And he goes, "Demons." And they laugh at him at first. He goes, "I'm telling you, demons are taking these kids." Because they're being taken at night, not in broad daylight, no witnesses, no forced entry. He goes, "You tell me there's a thief or a homebreaker out there that good? Introduce them to me." But, I think there's things that they could do, or have it be a vampire, either or. But, do something that makes this character as great as Darren McGavin played him. I mean, Darren McGavin set a legacy so high, that
McGavin has two performances in his career that are you just can't replicate them. Right. Or you have to get an equally brilliant, insightful actor to do it. And like, I think Alan Tudyk could do it really well. He'd be a great Kolchak. But he manages to mix humor and seriousness and maturity and imagination all at the same time. And there's only one other character I can think of who kind of does that, and that's Hawkeye Pierce.
Yeah.
Another TV icon of that era.
Yeah.
So finding the right voice from an author and from an actor, that's a great but tall order.
It is. It really is. Do you prefer? Have you seen the movie MASH too?
Yeah.
Okay, so Donald Sutherland or Alan Alda?
Okay. Until 3 or 4 seasons into MASH, I would say that Alan Alda is kind of forced into doing kind of a Donald Sutherland impression.
Yeah.
But by the time you get to, early to mid into that series, the character has changed so radically that they're totally different. So for early Hawkeye, Donald Sutherland, I love that. And that's a thing I even have adopted since I was a kid. When I'm trying to think of something, is that little Hawkeye whistle. And I think it's a great character. But it's a very Robert Altman character, and Altman is kind of a cold, distanced director. He sets things up, he sets his shots and things like that really far away, and he just lets you observe them. You're not dealing with a lot of close-ups or things like that, and there's other dialogue going on over the mix. And so Hawkeye is he's almost sociopathic. He's very, very, very distanced what's going on. He's cut off his emotional life from this horror that he's surrounded by. As we develop with Alan Alda's Hawkeye, it's all close-ups, and we see Hawkeye go in the opposite direction and develop a tremendous conscience because no one else will. Mm-hmm. So I think they're two great portrayals. The only way we could really tell it is if you put Alan Alda in the movie, and then if you put Donald Sutherland all the way through in the TV show. Having said that, just as an actor, Donald Sutherland would have had chunks of Alan Alda in his stool if you had put him in that TV series all the way through. Yeah. It's just fact. I mean, Alan Alda is one of my favorite actors. I love him to death. But then there's Donald Sutherland.
Yeah. Donald Sutherland did not like doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
I can imagine. I don't enjoy doing Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Rutger Hauer, it doesn't look like he's really engaged in the material a whole lot. No. That movie is what kept me from watching the TV series until like 2016.
The movie is literally a popcorn movie. That's what it is. It's
popcorn's gone kind of stale. Popcorn's gone. I think I'll stick with the Raisinets if that's the popcorn movie. Yeah, it just didn't work for me. Here's my problem with that whole franchise. I got a lot to say about the franchise, but my problem with it is Joss Whedon and his freaking titles. These terrible titles. Oh, it's ironic. It's like, no, it's not ironic. This Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Oh, but Buffy's real strong and sharp. And it's like, okay, well then call it Slayer.
Yeah.
And then you tune in and you find out this is person named Buffy. Yeah. And then you have to work back, or you call it Buffy, and you think you're tuning in for some teen thing, and then you get this other business, but it's playing both of the wrong cards at the wrong time for me.
No. My brother was more of a fan of the series and the movie than I was, so I watched it, but I didn't watch it or pay much attention to it. So what I'll say is there are movies that got made into series that ended up. I really enjoyed the series, like Stargate. So I thought that was real creative what they did with it as a series. Highlander was another. It was a good series too. It was a good television series.
And it had Roger Daltrey, and that's all I needed.
Adrian Paul did a hell of a job as Duncan MacLeod, but it's really just a lot of fun to look at those series and look at not just that, but Kolchak as a whole, and say, what would we like to see? Is there a studio or a writer you would trust to reboot it, though?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Joe Straczynski.
Okay.
Because, the guy can write anything. He is a really good horror writer. He put a lot of horror and Lovecraftian stuff into Babylon 5. He was the showrunner for the real Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
Forever. And he was a reporter. He was a beat reporter for years as his first job in the 70s. And he was producer of Twilight Zone. He has a really, really, really sarcastic, appropriately sarcastic, ironic, sardonic sense of humor. And I think he could get Carl Kolchak's voice in his sleep. To me, Joe Straczynski is really the reason to do a Night Stalker new series. That it's the project that and I suspect Straczynski would agree, has just been waiting for him.
Yeah.
So that's, yeah. I'm sure other people would do it well, but Joe, yeah.
I'm gonna pick three very talented writers. He did Halloween Night Dance, and I enjoyed reading it. Steph Hutchinson.
Okay.
Number two, because he's a very good writer, and I think he could do it justice, and his time is open, I believe, is when Patrick McCray. I think you've heard of him. I think you've heard of him.
Hey, thank you. Great. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I think you've heard of him. But Pat,
Hey,
you. And I don't know if the third one would be interested in doing it, but if he would be, and if he was willing to do it.
Smith.
What's that?
It better not be Seth Grahame-Smith, who wrote the Dark Shadows movie.
No, this guy, he writes interviews and stuff, and I've never read anything that he's writing fictionally, but I enjoy the way he writes an interview, because you could tell he's putting his heart into it. And I know that's a weird sort of analogy, but Justin Beam, I think, could definitely do it.
I don't know who that is. Maybe you've mentioned him to me before.
I have.
Okay.
He did. There's a podcast he does on Spotify. It's called the Justin Beam Radio Hour, and so he does interviews there. But he also writes interviews for for a bunch of magazines. He works for Paramount, so.
Oh, well, he'd be good. you know who would make an awesome Kolchak for any of those guys?
Yeah.
This just occurred to me. He literally has everything that you need. I'm totally serious. Patton fucking Oswalt. Patton Oswalt. You know what Patton Oswalt had to do after his wife died. She was writing some sort of true crime book or something like that. He finished it.
Yeah.
In the wake of his wife's death. I mean, when he gets, I don't know if you read his Twitter feed, when he gets serious, he gets really serious. But he keeps that sharp voice all the time. I mean, we're not talking about Seth Rogen as the Green Hornet or whatever. No, I mean, I think they would, and he's a good age for it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the public would accept it.
Right.
Anyway, that's just a thought. Patton Oswalt.
No, I love your picks. I think you made great picks.
Yeah.
So I don't think I have any more questions concerning the Night Stalker.
Well, here's the question. Okay, so you said so the three people you set up. We'll put me out of it for a second. I've been out of it since the podcast began. But Justin Beam, right? And then who was first?
Steph Hutchinson.
Okay, how would a Steph Hutchinson Night Stalker differ from one that Justin would do? How do you think they would differ?
Steph really knows how to capture your imagination with what he's writing by writing good character lines and good character depth. From what I've read of his work, because here's the big difference. Steph has written fictional work.
Okay.
The only thing I've read of Justin's is interviews.
Yeah.
So I'll go Steph first because he's a little easier.
Okay.
Steph really puts a lot into his characters, and he gives you that tension, but at the same time that sort of you feel sorry for that character, but you also feel terror, and that's what Steph really brings.
Okay.
With Justin, he just brings a lot of passion and a lot of heart to his written interviews, what I've read. So I think if he actually, I've told him this. I said, I would love for you to write something fictional, to put it out there, because I do think Justin needs something to do from a fictional sense to put something, because I think it would be great. And as far as you're concerned, you would definitely do a great job.
Well, thank you. What do you think I would bring to it? What would be
I think you would bring great character development. There's by reading your day books and reading the day book, I know you're right. You're writing about an act like what happened in the show, but there's things you do that you bring out character in within your writing. From what I've read, so I think you would do a fabulous job with characters.
That would, because you mentioned characters with at least two of the three guys, and thank you. Um, it's interesting because you would have to have continuing change.
Yep.
Kolchak character. I mean, that would be one of the ways to go about it, because your guest stars aren't on long enough
Right.
to okay, they to have anything that doesn't seem trite. Like, oh, I've changed. I'm, Christmas is real. Get the biggest goose or whatever, you know, at the end of that. And so then it really has to be, how do Vincenzo and Updike and Kolchak change over the course of the show?
Yeah.
And what does all this do to them? And I think that probably, then you're talking arc, because you've got to figure out, okay, well, where does Kolchak go, and where does he end, and where does Updike go, and where does he end, and where does Vincenzo go, and how does he end? And that all of these things have to nevertheless have conflict and surprise and so on. That would be really interesting. I think Updike would have to wind up being one of the big villains.
Yeah.
That Updike, so furious over Kolchak, going into this other world, starts to investigate it, really, really, really doggedly, and gets pulled into the wrong kind of thing. So that's clearly what happens with Updike. I think Kolchak, his biggest struggle would be his increasing lack of bravery and lack of confidence in the universe. That every time, he approaches something thinking, okay, well, this is this weird thing, but I still have this solid ground to stand on. And with every adventure, there's less and less solid ground of reality for him to stand on.
Yeah.
And that he has to fight, turn into, someone who's drawing weird spirals on the inside of his asylum walls. And it's that question of what does he find that grounds him? What does he find that pulls him back from just, as I think after a certain point, I mean, because he has, how many episodes of Night Stalker were there?
No, there weren't. I think there were, let's see,
maybe 20?
20, I think, yeah, give or take.
So let's say there were 20 episodes of Night Stalker, plus the 2 TV movies. He's got 22 unbelievably severe cases of PTSD.
Yeah.
If you follow the reality of that character. And so instead of him becoming tougher and more grizzled, I think that he either becomes just jumpy as a cat, or he starts hearing these stories and he just doesn't care. He's like, sure, I can mop up the Rakshasa that's over there, but then there's going to be a fire demon that's just going to show up over there, and I'm just going to go home and enjoy a Western until whatever's out there eventually comes to get me. It's going to be one or the other that's going to pull him back. And so then you have the third one is you have Vincenzo. And the question of, because Vincenzo's job is to stop Carl from reporting on these things, to constantly get in Carl's way. But but Vincenzo's also honest.
Yeah.
He's an honest guy. And if this story were taking place 20 years before, and Vincenzo was faced with the same types of stories, that Vincenzo would have been the one in the field.
Yeah.
So I think probably what would happen is that it would slowly get revealed that Vincenzo knew a lot more about the sort of things that were going on. and that back in the 50s, let's say, okay, if it were in the 70s, I guess now it would be back in the 90s, back in the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah.
That Vincenzo would have been the one who was dealing with all of this, and that he took down a big bad at some point. And so when he took over, not only did he have a tremendous eye and nose for bullshit, but he also knew that there was a sort of a background noise of cosmic weirdness, and it's always going to be there. So, Carl, stop risking your life. I'm assigning you to the cat show and to the Begonia Festival.
Right.
Because I care about you. Because, yeah, these things are going on all the time. You think you know stuff? I know far more than you do about what's going on right now. And honestly, we're kind of powerless to do anything about it. And, but as it goes on, Vincenzo starts being more and more open with him until Vincenzo realizes the big bad he took out isn't gone. And that he has to work to equip Carl with the ability to deal with it. And so, and unfortunately, the big bad then is associated with Updike,
Right.
who's had access to all of Vincenzo's secret files.
Yeah.
Because he never suspected Updike would have the imagination to go rooting around. But Updike's a snitch, and Updike is a snoop. And Updike is precisely the sort of guy who would do that if he got enough of a bee in his bonnet. And he could only be put down by Kolchak so many times, and, allowed to be put down by Kolchak so many times by Vincenzo, who secretly found it very amusing. So that's the development that I would have with those three characters, I think.
I like that. Who would you cast as Updike, or Vincenzo? I'm sorry.
Wow. I mean, my sense of actors stops about 15 years ago. So 15 years ago, I would have cast Ossie Davis. Mm-hmm. Now, I think Jeff Garlin. Jeff Garlin. Yeah, you know Jeff Garlin?
No.
Okay, did you ever see the Goldbergs?
The series?
Yeah.
I've heard of it, yeah.
Okay. Did you ever hear Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Yes, that I've heard of.
He's Jeff. He's Larry David's pal. His
okay.
producer. Yeah. Who would you cast?
Vincenzo, again, because this, depending on when this would get, if they'd ever green light a Night Stalker, but for the newspaper man, to someone who would, like you say, hide it and then understand, reveal to him he knew it all along, Christopher Walken.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
right.
Because he just, I mean, I think of the Dead Zone, I think of Prophecy, I think of the things that Walken as an actor brings to any role that he's ever done is phenomenal. And he could just play that proud man who, hey, you're going to go see this, you're going to go cover the local sports beat tonight, not this shit. No.
You know who else would be good? Stephen Fry.
Who's that? I'm sorry.
Did you see V for Vendetta?
No, I did not. I'm sorry.
Oh, man. Stephen Fry, he's been in so much, and I can't think of any of it right now. But he was on Blackadder for a long time.
Okay.
No,
I'm sorry.
He's very funny. He has an English talk show called QI. He's just a real interesting English bulldog of an actor.
I'm going to have to go watch V for Vendetta now. How many people have asked me to go watch that?
V for Vendetta is a tremendous movie. Oh, you're going to love it. You're going to have a great time. Yeah.
I don't know why I've never watched. It's just something I've never taken the time to watch.
You're going to have a great time. You have 2.5 marvelous hours waiting for you. You're going to have a terrific time. I envy you.
It's 2.5 hours long.
All those movies are too long now. What I wouldn't give for a big budget 90-minute movie.
Yeah,
It's one of the reasons I don't see movies. I don't know if I'm going to see the Spider-Man thing. I don't know if I have 2.5 to 3 hours of my life to give over to fun. I can't have that much fun. I would break.
You know when I got tired of the 3-hour movies? The moment I went to go see Titanic.
Sure.
That was it. I was done. Like, no.
Yeah.
I don't want to sit for 3 hours ever again. Ever.
Well, when you know how it's going to end, you know. Why didn't they? Well, I was going to make a joke about Kathy Bates, but I won't. Just imagine. I got Kathy Bates jokes for days. Especially weird that she had an American Horror Story.
I believe it. Oh my God. All right.
Lunch lady.
Is there anything you want to add?
I have a question for you.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
How come you're so great?
I'm not.
You're keeping this whole thing going. So you're watching Christmas Carol tomorrow?
Yes, that I am watching. I'm not podcasting with anybody tomorrow or even by myself. So I'm gonna wait till January to bring Butch back on. That way it's after the holidays. And
how'd that go? Were you happy?
Yes, he did a great job. He was fun.
You guys are perfect together.
You're fun. He's fun. That's just it. I want to come on and have fun with anybody. You know, I'm here to talk. So yeah. I love having fun.
To do again.
What's that?
Let's find something for the three of us to do again.
We do need to get together and do Halloween Kills.
Is that the new one?
Yes.
I haven't seen it yet. So that's good. Yep.
Okay. Let me know when you see it, and we will all three get together and do Halloween.
That's all
right. There's another one. What's that one movie? I don't know if you've seen it. Well, you said about it. Amityville Horror.
Yeah, like which one do you want to talk about?
The first one.
The real.
Yeah, the real one. Sort of the real.
Roland, Margot Kidder, Rod Steiger.
Yeah, because here's something, and you know what, we'll all three get together and do that one first.
Okay.
So you and Butch, let me know when you guys are gonna be together, and we'll all three do the Amityville, the first movie.
That sounds great. I can't wait.
Because there's something I want to discuss with you guys that involves, to me, the movie always overshadowed the real crime that happened. But
yeah,
but he's Patrick McCray. I'm Joel Sains. Patrick, man, I'm going to stop recording, but thank you so much, man.
It's a pleasure. My God, all the time. And I'll say this. I'll say it after this is over. So good night.
Good night.